So in this video, I'll be taking you through the day's events concerning the retrial of the nurse Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby is currently standing trial on one count of attempted murder. The information provided in this video is from the live reporting taken directly from inside the courtroom. What you will hear next is the prosecution's opening speech. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. Nicholas Johnson, KC, the prosecutor in the case, has begun his opening by telling jurors that Lucy Letby is charged with a single offence of attempted murder. He said, as you probably already know, there was another very long trial about a year ago. In that trial, Lucy Letby was convicted of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. Those 7 attempted murders related to 6 children. This case relates to an infant who can only be identified as Child K, who Letby allegedly attempted to murder in February 2016. Mr. Johnson said he was telling the jury about her previous convictions, not because they should convict her of this offence on the basis of what she had previously been found guilty of, but he explained, "We are suggesting the relevance gives you significant evidence as to what her intention was at the time we allege she did something to Child K. We are saying that her status as a multiple murderer and attempted murderer is an important piece of evidence you can, if you wish, take into account when you are considering whether we have made you sure she attempted to murder Child K." Documents are now being distributed to the jury. They include the neonatal unit review schedule, a floor plan of the neonatal unit with where babies were located at the start and the end of a shift. They include Child K, who was in room 1 at the end of the shift. Other babies on the unit are anonymised via initials. Their names aren't relevant to the proceedings, Mr. Johnson tells the jury. Also shown is which nurses were designated to each baby for that shift. Lucy Letby was a designated nurse for 2 babies in room 2 that shift. Mr. Johnson says the events relating to Child K were in nursery room 1, and, quote, "that gives rise to certain questions." Mr. Johnson shows the indictment which sets out the charge, that Letby attempted to murder the baby girl in February 2016. Also provided is an agreed glossary of medical-related terms. There are also agreed facts, that is material which is agreed between the prosecution and the defence. Mr. Johnson explains such material should be treated as facts proved in the case without the requirement for witnesses to be called to give evidence on such material. Mr. Johnson says the date of concern is February 17th, 2016. He says by this stage, Lucy Letby had murdered 5 babies and had attempted to murder 3 more. She had twice attempted to murder one of the latter. He says after this date, February 17th, 2016, Letby murdered 2 of 3 triplets on June 23rd to 24th, 2016, and had attempted to murder twins on April 9th, 2016, and a boy on June 3rd. Mr. Johnson shows, as part of the sequence of events, Facebook searches Letby had made for family members of babies who had died in June 2015. Mr. Johnson says these are not the only Facebook searches Letby had made, as she had searched for parents of other babies who have nothing to do with the case. He says Letby undoubtedly murdered babies and then searched for their parents. 2 of the Facebook searches for parents of 2 different babies Letby murdered are listed a minute apart. Further Facebook searches are shown, including repeated searches for some parents of murdered babies. Mr. Johnson says those Facebook searches continued until after June 2016. Mr. Johnson now turns to events in February 2016, when the mother of the baby girl arrived at the Countess of Chester Hospital on the morning of Monday, February 15th. Clinical notes are shown as transcribed versions and in their original handwriting in the sequence of events. Mr. Johnson tells the jury that the baby girl was very, very premature, at a gestation of 24 weeks and 6 days, compared to a standard 40-week pregnancy. But the mother was already in labour. Mr. Johnson explains that the baby girl was to need a transfer to a tertiary centre in the Mersey, Cheshire area, which would be either Liverpool Women's Hospital or Arrow Park. The Countess of Chester Hospital was not a tertiary centre. Consultant Dr. Sarah Brigham, a senior doctor whose speciality is pregnancy and childbirth and the time after that birth, wrote there was a need to transfer the baby girl to a level 3 neonatal unit. Mr. Johnson says normally the Countess would not have dealt with such premature deliveries, but he added the events took over, and the nearest available level 3 unit at the time was Preston. Given the risks involved with transport, Dr. Sarah Brigham noted, in relation to the potential transfer, cancelled patient, unstable to transfer. On Wednesday, February 17th, at 2:12 a.m, the baby girl was born. Mr. Johnson says she did remarkably well for such a premature baby. APGAR scores for the baby girl are shown to the court. 4 out of 10 for 1 minute after birth, 9 out of 10 at 5 minutes, 9 out of 10 at 10 minutes. A number of factors, including colour and response to touch, are assessed. Scores of 7 or above are considered babies in good condition, Mr. Johnson says. At the time of birth, Mr. Johnson says, Letby was with nursing colleague Joanne Williams, having signed and countersigned for medication for a baby in room 2. Mr. Johnson now moves on to when child K was admitted to the neonatal unit. She was passed to the care of Registrar Dr. James Smith, who was working under the supervision of consultant Dr. Ravi Jairam. She was intubated by Dr. Smith at 2:32 a.m. Jurors are now being shown a video depicting how to intubate a person. In the video of the intubation procedure, the nurse explains that sometimes the intubation tube can become blocked with secretions and have to be unblocked using suction. Continuing, Mr. Johnson said that child K was intubated, she was given some medication to make her lungs more pliable and was admitted to the neonatal unit at 2:40 a.m. Mr. Johnson previously said there were a number of times the intubation tube moved for child K. Mr. Johnson says for that shift, Dr. John Gibbs was the paediatrician for that week. Dr. Ravi Jairam is listed as the on-call consultant between 4:30 p.m. and 8:30 a.m. Nursing staff are shift leader Caroline Oakley with designated nurse Joanne Williams and other nurses Lucy Letby and Sophie Ellis, plus nursery nurse Valerie Thomas. A floor plan shows Letby was the designated nurse for 2 babies in nursery room 2 at the start of that night shift. 2 babies were being looked after in room 1 by designated nurse Caroline Oakley. Joanne Williams was designated nurse for a baby in room 2. She was later designated as the nurse for child K that night. Between 2:36 a.m. and 2:50 a.m, Lucy Letby was making nursing notes for one of the 2 babies she was designated to look after in room 2. At 2:45 a.m, child K was given surfactant down an ET tube to help with her lungs. At 3 a.m, IV fluids for child K was set up by nurses Joanne Williams and Caroline Oakley. At that time, Lucy Letby was making entries on the notes for one of the babies she was designated nurse for between 3:02 a.m. and 3:12 a.m. At 3:11 a.m, Joanne Williams entered the neonatal unit from the labour ward. Notes from the transport service say Dr. Ravi Jairam made a call to them at 3:15 a.m. to arrange transport for child K to a level 3 hospital. At this time, Lucy Letby was giving medication to a baby she was designated nurse for in room 2. At 3:30 a.m, Letby recorded observations for that baby in room 2. Also at that time, a lot of things were being recorded, Mr. Johnson says. Letby signed for morphine for child K with Joanne Williams. The morphine was a painkiller and sedation. It was to be given as child K had been intubated, Mr. Johnson tells the court. It is so they don't interfere with the tube, he adds. Joanne Williams records the vital signs for child K at 3:30 a.m. Just before 3:40 a.m, Caroline Oakley was away from the unit, as at 3:40 there is a digital record of her coming back into the unit. Nursery nurse Valerie Thomas, looking after babies in rooms 3 and 4, was also out of the unit, as again there is a record of her returning to the unit at 3:40. At about that time, Dr. Ravi Jairam is recorded as communicating with the transport team, being on the phone at the nurses' station. It was about this time that child K collapsed, Mr. Johnson tells the court. The allegation, he says, is straightforward. He says Joanne Williams had left the neonatal unit at this time to see child K's mother, having left child K ventilated and sedated. Dr. Jairam was distracted and other nurses were out of the unit. That would leave Sophie Ellis and Lucy Letby in the unit covering 4 nurseries, Mr. Johnson said. While Joanne Williams was out of room 1, Lucy Letby was in there on her own. That is what Dr. Jairam saw when he went in there at the time of the collapse, Mr. Johnson says. Mr. Johnson says child K was connected to a machine checking her heart rate and oxygen levels. Those machines should have alarmed if there was an issue, but they did not. Someone had disabled them, Mr. Johnson says. Not only that, but Lucy Letby was doing nothing. We say that in those circumstances, the only reasonable thing for a nurse to have done was to call for help and or use the neopuff to breathe for the child. The ET tube had become displaced, Mr. Johnson says. The fact Lucy Letby was doing nothing and the alarm was not sounding was that Letby, the convicted murderer, had displaced the tube. Nursing notes written retrospectively by Joanne Williams said child K had begun to desaturate to dangerous levels. Child K's ET tube was dislodged. It was removed and she was reintubated on the second attempt. Mr. Johnson asked the issue is how did the tube become dislodged? Child K was given a loading dose of morphine to guard against the possibility that this very premature child had wriggled to extubate herself. The morphine dose and infusion administration were timed at 3:50 a.m. It is initialed JW, but in the handwriting of Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby had been caught virtually red-handed by Dr. Jairam, Mr. Johnson says, adding that child K's ET tube later dislodged twice more, and the evidence establishes that Lucy Letby was there, even though the babies she was to look after were in room 2. Lucy Letby became closely involved with child K's care, despite having primary responsibility in room 2. She was making child K part of her business, Mr. Johnson tells the jury. At 4:20 a.m, Letby co-signed for medication for child K, while Joanne Williams was coming from the labour ward. About 20 minutes later, medication was given to child K by Lucy Letby and Caroline Oakley. Between 4:48 a.m. and 5:07 a.m, child K's designated nurse was completing nursing notes for the baby girl. While that was happening, Lucy Letby and Caroline Oakley were giving further medication to child K. At 5:23 a.m, Letby was again involved. At 5:53 a.m, a note from the transport team recorded Dr. Jairam was keen to get child K to Arrow Park Hospital. It was noted, quote, keen not to miss window of opportunity whilst baby stable. Between 6:04 a.m. and 6:10 a.m, Letby formally booked in child K to the neonatal unit on the computer system. In the checklist is the care of an ET tube. Much of the computerized record is taken from a handwritten form. Mr. Johnson says the handwritten notes are kept with the baby by the incubator. Mr. Johnson says she would have had to have got the records for child K from the incubator. Once she had completed that, she would have had to have returned the handwritten records to the incubator. During that time, recorded at 6:07 and 23 seconds, an X-ray is taken of child K by radiographer Anne Kember using a mobile machine. The X-ray was taken in nursery room 1. A video demonstrating how an intubated baby has an X-ray taken by the mobile machine is played to the court. The X-ray reports, quote, ET tube in satisfactory position. It adds, quote, NG tube, feeding tube in satisfactory position with its tip in the gastric body. Mr. Johnson says the time the X-ray is recorded may not be accurate. At 6:09 a.m, Anne Kember is recorded as entering the neonatal unit. He says the process of the X-ray takes about 10 to 15 minutes, which means the X-ray happened at about 6:20 a.m. Within a few minutes of that, the ET tube was dislodged again. Mr. Johnson says that Lucy Letby was trying to create the impression that child K, heavily sedated, had dislodged her own tube. The third desaturation happened at the time of the handover to the day shift. A nursing colleague was the shift leader at this time. As she came in, she heard a call for help from Lucy Letby, who was not the designated nurse for child K. Letby was at the incubator of child K in nursery room 1. The day shift leader, Dr. Jairam, Mel Taylor and Nurse Williams went in. The issue was the ET tube was too far in by 1.5 centimetres, or about 20% too far in. The ET tube was withdrawn and child K picked up immediately, Mr. Johnson says. He adds this, the ET tube being dislodged, was the same problem twice after Dr. Jairam had witnessed it. We say that this is coincidences too far, Mr. Johnson tells the court. He says Letby had tried to create the impression child K had a problem. Mr. Johnson says child K was moved to the transport incubator at noon, then handed over to the team taking her to Arrow Park at 12:25 p.m. Later that day, Letby replied to a text by a nursing colleague saying, 25-weeker delivered, so fairly busy. Child K died at Arrow Park Hospital on February 20th. Mr. Johnson says the prosecution do not say what Lucy Letby did caused child K's death. On April 20th, 2018 at 11:56 p.m, Lucy Letby searched on Facebook for the surname of child K. Mr. Johnson says that has significance when taken in conjunction with Letby's other Facebook searches for parents of babies she killed. Mr. Johnson says the case may come down to a single issue. Do you believe Dr. Jairam saying what he saw? Do you believe he is telling you the truth about what he saw? And if you do you accept what we alleged Lucy Letby was trying to do, bearing in mind what we have also proved? That concludes the prosecution opening speech. Okay, so tomorrow I'll be bringing you the defence opening statement, followed by any proceedings which then take place later on Thursday. If you wish to keep up to date with the latest concerning the retrial of Lucy Letby, don't forget to subscribe down below. As always, many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.